The village of San Esteban del Llano stood quiet beneath the shadow of the eastern Andes, a place forgotten even by the road. Only the old stone church remained from the time of the Jesuits, built when the land still believed it could hold its faith. By 1962, the roof had sunk inward, the tower leaned slightly, and the people had stopped coming to Mass. They said the air had changed after the quake. It wasn't the ground that frightened them, but the sound, or rather, the lack of it. For 3 full minutes, when the earth moved, there had been no noise at all. No wind, no birds, not even the creak of timbers falling. The world had moved in silence. After that, nothing in San Esteban sounded quite right. The bells of the church stopped ringing on their own. When struck, they made only dull, breathless notes. The well no longer echoed when you dropped a stone. Even the dogs barked in whispers. By May, most of the villagers had left. Those who remained said they stayed because they had nowhere else to go, or because they wanted to hear the silence again, though they didn't say it aloud. Father Ignacio Velarde was one of them. He was 61, with hands too large for the delicate silver chalice he still polished every morning. He had spent 30 years saying Mass in that church, and though he rarely smiled, the villagers trusted him. He said the silence was not a curse, but an unanswered question. And questions, he told them, always wait for a reply. The reply came in August. It was evening when it happened. A storm had gathered over the valley, the kind that moves without wind. Father Ignacio was closing the chapel doors when he heard it. A sound, faint at first, deep and hollow, rising from beneath the stone floor. He thought it was thunder, but it wasn't. It was a note, clear, low, impossibly pure. He froze. The candlelight flickered against the wooden pews. Then another note joined the first, slightly higher, trembling in the air. He stepped back, his pulse quickening. The sound filled the church evenly, without echo, as though the stones themselves were singing. He crossed himself. The door behind him shut on its own. Outside, the storm had stopped. Inside, the sound deepened. A voice without breath, a melody without language. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest, feeling the vibration run through the floor, up his spine, into his ribs. Then he realized something strange. It wasn't coming from below. It was coming from within the walls. The sound moved like water, slow and deliberate, passing through each column as though searching. He called out, "Who's there?" But his voice died before reaching the altar. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a single word returned, faint and delayed, as if spoken through stone. Here. He stood still, every candle trembling. He thought it must have been an echo. Yet echoes repeat what you say. This one answered. He backed away until his shoulders touched the door. The sound grew louder, layered now. Not one voice, but many, forming chords too perfect to be human. And beneath those chords, so soft it felt like a heartbeat, came another sound entirely, breathing. The priest fell to the floor, covering his ears, but it made no difference. The sound wasn't in the air anymore. It was in him. When the villagers found him the next morning, he was still on his knees before the altar. His eyes were open. The candles had all burned out, and though the church was silent, his lips were moving, shaping words no one could hear. The villagers buried him behind the chapel 3 days later, but that night, the sound returned. It began just before midnight. The faint hum of stone, the slow, mournful rise of a hymn no one had taught. And by dawn, every wall in San Esteban was vibrating gently, as though the village itself were singing. By the time the sun rose over San Esteban, every wall in the village was trembling faintly. The people woke in silence, their cups shaking on the tables, the glass panes humming with a tone so low it felt more like breath than sound. They said it began in the church, but spread outward like water seeping through earth. At first, it was gentle, a vibration more felt than heard. Then, as light touched the bell tower, the pitch rose. A note so pure it seemed to come from nowhere at all. Some ran outside, others fell to their knees, praying without words. But even those who prayed felt it inside their chests, the resonance moving in time with their heartbeat. By mid-morning, the sound had formed melody, slow, deliberate, layered. Voices that were not voices. The old swore they heard choirs. The children said they heard wind. But to everyone else, it was neither. It was something that lived between air and silence. No one entered the church that day. They watched from the square as the tower's stones pulsed faintly with light. Not bright, but warm, as if illuminated from within. Some said it looked alive. Others said it was remembering. At noon, the song stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. The people covered their ears, expecting the sound to return, but it didn't. The air was hollow. Then came the smell, faint at first, then stronger. Damp lime and candle wax. The scent of an old church before a funeral. That evening, when the wind returned, it carried something with it. The melody again, softer this time, fractured, fading. But it wasn't coming from the church anymore. It was coming from the hills. The villagers followed the sound until the fog thickened. There, among the rocks above the valley, they found small cracks in the ground, barely wide enough to fit a hand. The air inside them was warm. From within, the sound echoed faintly, as if the earth itself were breathing out the same hymn. Father Ignacio's grave lay not far from there. The soil above it had sunk slightly, leaving a shallow depression shaped like a circle. At its center, a single candle stood upright, unburned, but melted halfway down, as though it had been lit and frozen mid-flame. That night, no one slept. The sound drifted through the village in waves, not constant, but rhythmic, as if something vast were exhaling beneath the earth. The next morning, the mayor sent word to La Paz. He asked for engineers, scientists, anyone who could explain what they were hearing. But when the trucks arrived a week later, the sound had stopped. The church doors were open, and the air inside was dry. The altar was untouched. Yet on the wall behind it, etched faintly into the stone, were lines, long, smooth, curved. Like the grooves of sound carved into a record, they stretched across the entire wall in perfect parallel arcs. When sunlight struck them, the air vibrated again, a single note that faded as quickly as it came. One of the engineers called it coincidence. Another said the tremor months before had caused microfractures. But that night, as they camped by the road, the air changed. The same low hum returned, passing through their tents like a sigh. Their instruments recorded nothing. No frequency, no pressure change. Only the movement of sound without source. In the morning, they left. The villagers stayed. They said the silence that followed was worse than the sound. They said the church was waiting for something, that the hymn hadn't ended, only paused. And beneath the floor, where the foundation met the mountain, they began to hear it again. Faint, steady, patient, as if the stones themselves were learning how to breathe. The silence after that second awakening didn't feel natural. It wasn't the stillness of peace, but of something holding its breath. The air in San Esteban grew thick, the kind that makes sound vanish halfway through a word. Footsteps no longer echoed. Hammers struck wood and gave no ring. Even the river below the hill ran noiselessly, its water turning pale as if diluted by ash. At night, the villagers said they could feel the pulse again beneath their beds. Not shaking, not moving, but alive. When they pressed their ears to the floor, they could hear faint vibrations rising from deep below the ground, timed perfectly, steady as heartbeat. Father Ignacio's successor never came. The diocese sent letters that never reached the valley. The road collapsed after the last rain of September, and soon the world forgot about San Esteban entirely. Yet inside the village, the people stayed. Out of devotion, or guilt, or fear, no one could tell anymore. It was the widow Teresa Mina who first heard the melody again. It was just after dawn. She was washing clothes by the well when the air shifted, thin and sharp like the moment before thunder. Then the sound came, faint at first, barely a tremor of tone. But it wasn't random. It was measured, ordered. 3 long notes, 1 short. Pause. Then again. She froze, her hands still in the water. When she looked down, she saw the surface vibrating, the ripples forming perfect concentric circles spreading outward from where she stood. She whispered the Lord's Prayer under her breath, but halfway through, her own voice failed her. For a moment, it was as if her words had been taken from her mouth. Then she heard the prayer continuing, but not from her, from the well. Her voice, still speaking, echoing upward in perfect imitation, finishing the prayer she had started. When she stumbled backward, her hands slipped on the stones. The sound stopped. Only the water moved, slowly calming until it reflected the gray sky. She told no one that morning, but by noon, others began to hear it too. Notes rising from the cracks in the road, from the gaps between houses, from the hollow spaces in the walls. Each sound lasted no more than a second, but they carried melody, fragments of hymns no one had sung in decades. It wasn't until that Sunday that the full song returned. Just before the hour the bell once rang for Mass, the fog rolled in from the mountains. It was thicker than usual, heavy and luminous, swallowing the church entirely. Inside, the villagers said the air vibrated like glass. Then came the first voice. Not human, but shaped like one. A tone with breath in it, deep and pure. It stretched upward until it found harmony, and others joined, weaving into something vast and slow. There were no words, no melody they could follow, but every person there swore they heard something familiar in it, the rhythm of their own heartbeat, the echo of their own names hidden within the harmony. When the sound reached its height, every candle in the church went out. For an instant, they said the air turned cold enough to burn. Then light returned, but not from the candles. The walls glowed. Thin lines of pale fire traced along the stone grooves behind the altar, moving with the rhythm of the song. The same patterns that the engineers had found, the same arcs, alive now, resonating. The church was singing, and beneath that impossible choir, beneath the walls, beneath the earth, came another sound, faint, rhythmic, endless, the echo of breath. When the last note faded, the villagers fell to their knees. No one spoke. Even after the sound died, the air stayed heavy, humming like a string pulled too tight. That night, Teresa Mina woke to find the fog had entered her house. It clung to the ceiling like smoke, curling above her bed. She said it whispered. Only one word. Listen. After that night, the fog became part of the village. It would roll in after dusk and linger until dawn, moving through the streets with the patience of something that no longer needed to hurry. The people of San Esteban stopped speaking after sunset. They learned that sound traveled strangely in the mist. Whispers stretched too far, and even a breath could echo. When they forgot and spoke aloud, the fog replied. It wasn't mocking or cruel. It was gentle. It repeated their words with impossible precision, returning them a heartbeat later in the same tone, but softer, as though the air was trying to remember how the voice had felt. At first, the villagers thought they were imagining it. Then it began happening during the day. You could say your name, and a moment later, hear it again, from somewhere inside the walls, or from beneath the ground. Children began playing a game with it. They would stand near the church, shout a word, and wait for the echo. But it wasn't an echo. The words didn't bounce. They came back changed, slightly slower, as if sung. On the seventh day after the fog's return, all of them stopped at once. Every voice, every whisper, every reply ceased in perfect unison. The air stilled so suddenly, it felt alive. That night, the village slept without sound for the first time in months. At dawn, the church doors opened by themselves. The people gathered in the square, too afraid to enter. Inside, sunlight filtered through the colored glass in soft patches, falling across the pews like spilled paint. Dust floated in thin beams. The air smelled faintly of lime and iron. Then, from somewhere deep within the walls, a tone rose. One note, pure and resonant. It grew stronger, joined by others, low at first, then climbing, until the church filled again with that same impossible harmony. But this time, there were words. Not in Spanish, not in Latin, something older, slower. The villagers said it didn't sound like prayer or song. It sounded like remembering. The sound was too perfect to be human. It bent the air, made the glass tremble in its frames, turned the dust into shimmer. The villagers fell to their knees again. A few covered their ears, but the sound passed through them anyway. Not loud, not painful, but total. Then came the part that no one could explain. The church began to breathe. The stones along the walls moved, expanding and contracting so slightly you could see it only in the light. The pattern matched the rhythm of the hymn. Inhale, exhale, pause. It lasted 21 minutes. When the song ended, the building fell still. The air cooled. and from within the fog that still lingered near the door, a voice, small, clear, and impossibly human, spoke a single phrase. It was never gone. No one dared enter. For 3 days, the church stood silent again. Then, on the fourth night, a light appeared inside. Soft, steady, moving like candlelight, though there were no candles. It shone through the cracks between the stones, illuminating the square with pale warmth. The villagers gathered, whispering. One of them, Rafael Quesada, a farmer who had lost his wife the year before, stepped forward. He said he recognized the light, that it had the same color as the one that passed through her hands when she prayed at dusk. He touched the door. It was warm. The others called for him to stop, but he pushed it open. The light poured out. When their eyes adjusted, the church was empty. Raphael was gone. Only his hat remained by the threshold. But those who listened carefully said they could still hear something, faint and slow, a man's voice humming softly along with the fading light, as though he had joined whatever song waited inside the stone. In the days that followed Rafael Quesada's disappearance, the light inside the church dimmed but never went out. It glowed faintly through the cracks in the masonry at night, as if the stones themselves had learned to hold warmth. The villagers avoided the square after sunset, crossing themselves whenever the wind carried sound from that direction. By the second week, the air inside San Esteban had changed again. The silence grew thick, pressing against the ears like weight. Conversations turned brief, clipped. People began to lose their sense of distance. Footsteps no longer told where they came from, and voices, even whispered, seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then the singing returned. It began quietly, just before dawn, a low hum rising through the ground, spreading beneath the houses. Doors rattled softly. Windows fogged from the inside. The sound was familiar, but not identical to before. Slower, deeper, as though the voice of the church had aged. When the villagers gathered near the plaza, they saw that the mist had returned too, heavier than ever, wrapping the bell tower up to its midpoint. The air shimmered with condensation. They waited. Then, from within the fog, the first clear words emerged. Not in Latin, not even in language, but syllables shaped by tone, vowels drawn out like breath between sobs. The sound pulsed with rhythm, almost human, but every phrase ended in the same rising note, one that made the chest tighten as if the air itself were being pulled away. By the third repetition, everyone recognized the pattern. It was a requiem. The church was singing the dead back to life. Some turned and fled. Others fell to their knees, trembling. The priest's old grave began to tremble with the same rhythm. The soil pulsed faintly under the flickering light. From beneath it came a soft crack. Not thunder, not earth shifting, but the slow, deliberate sound of stone splitting. A single line opened across the ground. Warm air escaped. It carried with it the scent of wax and dust, the same as the chapel had before the quake. That strange, sterile sweetness of stone that remembers prayer. The villagers ran. Only Teresa Mina stayed. She had heard the same voice once before, long ago, when the fog whispered her name through the water of the well. Now it was whispering again. She stepped forward, one hand trembling against her chest. The sound deepened, drawing her closer. The light flickered through the windows like the pulse of something enormous breathing just below the floor. The wind stopped. Inside the church, the melody shifted. The notes lengthened, drawing out like sighs. Then, one by one, voices joined it. Small, clear, childlike. The people at the edge of the plaza froze. They recognized the voices. They were their children's. Every lost name returned in song. Some cried out. Some begged for it to stop. But the sound didn't stop. It swelled, rising until the whole valley hummed with impossible harmony. Thousands of tones layered into one vast breath. The air shimmered, and then, suddenly, the sound ceased. A silence so complete it seemed to erase time. The fog thinned, the light dimmed, and the church door creaked open on its own. Teresa stood inside the doorway. Her face was calm, her eyes wet. When she spoke, her voice was not hers. "They have learned the words." Then she smiled and stepped back into the shadows. The door closed. No one ever saw her again. That night, the villagers packed what they could and fled. By morning, San Esteban was empty. The mist lingered, unmoving, around the church until sunrise, then receded into the hills. For years afterward, travelers crossing that stretch of road claimed they could still hear the faint echo of a hymn rising from the valley. Slow, wordless, endless, the sound of something vast and gentle remembering how to speak. When the villagers left San Esteban del Llano, they didn't look back. The road twisted upward through fog and dust, and though the church remained visible in the distance for several kilometers, no one dared turn their head. Some said that if you looked long enough, the building seemed to move, not sway, not crumble, but breathe. By the third day of travel, the air around them grew still again. No birds followed, no insects stirred. The silence that had once belonged to the valley seemed to travel with them. It sat inside their throats like a swallowed word. In the city of Sucre, where they settled temporarily, they tried to speak of what had happened, but language failed. The priests who listened to their confessions found gaps, long pauses where memory stopped, as though the mind refused to replay certain sounds. The diocese sent investigators, 2 men and 1 woman, all trained in seismology and church restoration. They arrived in the valley 2 months later, at the start of the rainy season. From the ridge above San Esteban, they reported seeing the church intact. The village around it had half collapsed into the mud. No human footprints led in or out. The grass near the plaza was unusually long and uniform, as if growing undisturbed for years. They camped outside the perimeter, near the old stone well. That first night, their equipment recorded faint tones, not voices, not melody, just vibration at consistent intervals. The woman, Maria Cardenas, wrote in her notes, "The ground sings when we breathe. It stops when we hold our breath." The next morning, they entered the church. The air was dry. Dust hung in beams of light slanting through the roof. Every pew was coated in a thin gray film. On the altar, where the cross should have stood, lay a single candle. It was half melted but unburned, the wick blackened at the tip. The walls were covered in markings. Not carvings, indentations, shallow grooves curved in patterns like sound waves. They ran the length of the nave, perfectly symmetrical, converging behind the altar into a single circular form. When the team clapped their hands, the sound didn't return. The acoustics were gone. No echo, no resonance. It was as though the air itself refused to vibrate. That night, the rain came. Their recordings picked up something new. Low frequencies, too regular to be thunder. The waveform formed a pattern. 3 pulses, pause, 2, pause, 3. Maria stayed up late, listening through headphones. She noted that beneath the tones, there were faint fluctuations. Voices shaped by pitch, but not language. The sound had structure, phrasing, rhythm. At exactly midnight, all 3 heard it at once. A single note rising through the floorboards. They said it was soft at first, so faint it could have been mistaken for a draft. But it grew quickly, filling the space between their breaths until their own voices vanished beneath it. The instruments began recording without input. Pens rolled off tables. The candle on the altar lit itself, the flame forming a steady, unnatural cone that never wavered. The song that followed lasted 11 minutes. Maria described it later, in a note never meant for publication. It wasn't sound. It was the shape of sound, the idea of music remembering itself. When it stopped, the candle went out, leaving smoke that smelled faintly of wax and salt. By morning, one of the investigators was gone. His tent stood open, gear untouched. The other 2 left the valley within the hour, abandoning their instruments. The recordings survived. When replayed weeks later in Sucre, they revealed something no one had heard in the field. Faint children's voices layered beneath the resonance, singing a fragment of a hymn still taught in rural parishes. Bendito sea tu nombre, blessed be your name. But the words weren't sung in unison. They were repeating, answering each other, as if the mountain itself had learned to respond. The tapes reached La Paz in January of 1963. They were delivered unmarked, sealed in brown paper, and accompanied only by a single sheet of handwritten notes from Maria Cardenas. No date, no signature, just a line in pencil. Play it softly. It doesn't like to be loud. The archivists who received them assumed they were seismic recordings. They threaded the first reel onto a deck in the acoustics lab. The opening seconds were empty, a thin static hum consistent with background interference. Then came the tone, low, steady, a note so clean it felt synthetic, yet the tape was analog. Beneath it, a faint tremor, like fabric brushing against wood. At 40 seconds, another tone joined, higher, slightly unstable. Together they formed a third note, harmonic, producing a pulse every 4 seconds. The technician adjusted the volume. The air changed. He said later it felt as though the sound had gained weight, like the room itself was leaning toward the recorder. The light above the console flickered once. Then, faintly through the static, came breath, human breath. It rose and fell between the pulses, perfectly timed. The second technician began to panic. He tried to stop the reel, but the controls didn't respond. The tape kept turning. The sound thickened. Layers of it now. Not just tones, but faint, distant voices forming words that dissolved before they could be understood. The pressure in the room increased. Both men felt it in their chests. One of them shouted. The other swore he heard the echo before his own voice. Then came a sound like a bell ringing underwater. Dull, round, heavy. Every light in the building went out. The reel stopped on its own. When the power returned, the room was filled with a faint smell of lime and candle smoke. The tape had rewound itself. The recording was locked in the archives and labeled acoustic malfunction. But one copy was missing. Weeks later, a shortwave station in Cochabamba reported interference during their late-night broadcast. Listeners called to complain about a strange hum that overpowered the music. The station's engineers traced the signal to an unlisted frequency bleeding into their range. Consistent, repeating, organized. 3 pulses. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. They captured 3 minutes of it before the interference stopped. When they played it back, the sound wasn't random noise. It was a chord progression, a hymn without words. When reversed, the waveform produced a second melody, higher and slower, almost like a response. An analyst in the station's office overlaid the 2 patterns and discovered they matched perfectly. A call and an answer, 2 halves of one structure. He played them together. The speakers cracked once, then silence. From the hallway outside the recording room, the janitor heard faint music, like an organ playing far away, too soft to be real. The next day, the analyst was gone. His chair was still warm. On his desk lay a note written in red pencil. It's learning. No one entered the lab again. The station closed 3 months later. By spring, every copy of the San Esteban recordings had disappeared from government archives. The official reason? Moisture damage. But the people in the valley, the ones who had fled, began to hear it again. From their new homes, miles away, they said the sound returned in the nights before rain. A faint hum in the walls, a vibration in the glass, a single tone that grew and faded like breath. And when the first drops fell on their roofs, they swore they could hear the hymn again. No words, no melody, just sound remembering itself. By mid-1963, San Esteban del Llano had vanished from Bolivian maps. The government cited landslides. The church records were sealed. The Diocese of Oruro listed the parish as deactivated, yet the valley still existed. Satellite photos taken decades later would show the faint outline of a structure at its center. Roof intact, walls upright, the shadow of the bell tower leaning slightly east. But for the people who had once lived there, the village never really stayed gone. In Sucre, in La Paz, even as far as Potosi, they spoke of nights when the air itself seemed to breathe again. Houses would vibrate faintly. Cups would hum on tables. It always began the same way. 3 tones, low and round, echoing from nowhere. Then 2 shorter ones, lighter, almost playful. 3, 2, 3. The sound appeared only in silence, as if drawn to places where no voices remained. Old men woke to the smell of candle wax. Children whispered of music coming from drains, from walls, from the thin crack beneath their doors. Mothers began sleeping with their windows open, certain that if they didn't let the sound escape, it would find another way in. By late autumn, a rumor spread. Someone had gone back. No one knew his name. Some said he was a priest, others a scientist. But everyone agreed he had returned to San Esteban alone. Weeks passed before anything surfaced. Then a farmer found a small reel of magnetic tape lodged in the reeds near the river that once bordered the valley. The reel was labeled in neat handwriting, Testigo, witness. He turned it over to a local journalist. The journalist, curious, borrowed a deck from a friend and played the tape in his kitchen. The first minute was blank. Then, faintly, came footsteps on stone. A man's voice, calm but strained. Recording begins at the chapel door. Air feels charged. The light. It moves. Static followed. Then a sound that wasn't static. A soft inhale, perfectly timed. "It's still singing," the man whispered. "But not like before. It's slower now. Deeper. It waits between notes." The tape hissed. Then came the melody. Faint, hollow, immense. It was beautiful in a way that frightened him. Each note lingered too long, like an echo that refused to end. He gasped. "There's something in the air. It's vibrating through my chest." Like standing inside a breath, the recorder crackled violently, then went silent. A few seconds later, the same voice returned, but the tone had changed. It was flat, hollow, as if the man were speaking from a great distance. "It knows I'm here." Then, overlapping with his words, came a faint harmony. A second voice, then a third. Not replies, imitations. They repeated him, syllable for syllable, each slightly delayed. The sound grew stronger until his own words were buried beneath them. The last thing he said was almost a whisper. "It doesn't need us anymore." Then the tape ended. The journalist destroyed the reel. But by then, several copies had been made. One was played on the air by mistake. Listeners across 3 provinces reported the same thing. When the recording reached the point where the man said, "It knows I'm here," every radio in the house began to vibrate. Then, faintly, beneath the static, a child's voice whispered, "We remember." The station burned down 2 weeks later. After that, no one went back to the valley. But the sound didn't stop. It drifted upward, following wind currents, carried through the mountain passes. And on clear nights, when fog touched the ridges, the highland towns heard faint hymns rising from below. The same slow cadence, the same breathing tone, the same harmony that began in stone. People stopped calling it a church. They started calling it La Garganta, the throat, a place where silence had learned to sing. By 1965, San Esteban had become a legend told in whispers between border towns. The truck drivers who passed through the mountain roads called it La Garganta de Dios, God's throat, though some said the name was blasphemy. They claimed that if you stopped your engine at night along that stretch, you could hear it breathe. One long inhalation that lasted minutes, and an exhale that carried melody instead of wind. Most dismissed it as superstition, until someone captured it. A sound technician from La Paz named Hernan Villalobos was testing directional microphones for geological surveys. He set one near the ridge where the valley began, aiming it downward, just to record the echo of the wind. The next morning, he found the reel full, 12 hours of uninterrupted sound. When he played it back, the first half was empty. Low frequencies of wind, insects, rainfall. But around the 6th hour, the tone began. Soft at first, clear, so pure it clipped the audio needle. Then, beneath it, faint and distant, came voices. Not random noise, singing. Hernan amplified it. The melody emerged slowly, not chaotic, but structured, deliberate. Each voice entered at precise intervals, blending into harmony like a cathedral choir. But there were no words, no human breathing between notes. He transcribed the sound into spectrogram form. The frequency pattern was symmetrical. 3 long waves, 2 short, 3 again. He labeled it simply, response pattern. When he brought the findings to his supervisor, they played the reel in an acoustically sealed chamber. At first, everything was normal. Then the equipment began to hum. Not from the tape, but from the walls. The tone reproduced itself physically, resonating in the concrete. Hernan turned off the player. The hum didn't stop. It continued, softer but persistent, even after the tape had been removed. The walls trembled as if something enormous were breathing through them. When they left the room, they realized the sound followed them into the hallway. It wasn't in the reel anymore. It was in the air. The lab was closed that night. The next morning, the floor near the recording chamber had cracked. long curved lines resembling arcs of vibration radiating outward from where the player had stood. The cracks were shallow, but their pattern was exact. An imprint of the frequency Hernan had labeled response pattern. He resigned 2 days later. The reel was sealed in a metal case and sent to a government archive. It disappeared en route, but the sound didn't. Reports came from mining stations across the Andes of low-frequency hums that synchronized with the rhythm of human breath. Entire shifts of workers claimed they heard singing through their machinery, faint and layered, like choirs buried deep inside the stone. One station manager, an engineer named Rojas, kept a journal. His last entry read, "It's not sound, it's pressure. It's the air trying to speak through us." He never submitted another report. By the early 1970s, the legend reached Europe. A Bolivian ethnomusicologist, Elvira Salvatierra, wrote an article calling it the first living hymn. She argued that what the people called La Garganta was an acoustic phenomenon caused by subsonic harmonics in limestone cavities. Her paper included one surviving frequency chart, Hernan's original, retrieved anonymously. But at the bottom of her manuscript, in handwriting smaller than the rest, was a line the editor didn't print. "It matches human respiration at rest, 47 per minute. It's breathing." She never published again. Years later, her assistant described finding her at home one night, seated by her window, a recorder spinning silently beside her. When he spoke, she didn't turn. She only said, "I can hear the church again." Then, almost gently, as if repeating a fact she no longer questioned, "It's closer." By the time digital archives began replacing tapes, San Esteban was a myth too quiet to chase. The coordinates were lost. The valley's soil had shifted, but the sound remained. Shortwave operators began reporting faint tones between transmissions. Steady, musical, consistent. 3, 2, 3. And sometimes, if you listened long enough, a second pattern answered. 2, 3, 2. As though the silence itself had begun to sing back. By the turn of the millennium, San Esteban del Llano existed only in fragments. Coordinates blurred on old maps, reels mislabeled, reports sealed under acoustic anomalies. The valley was erased, but not the sound. The sound endured, buried in frequencies no one meant to hear. Meteorologists caught it first, a faint vibration recorded during atmospheric pressure readings near the Andes. It appeared irregularly, synchronized with no weather pattern, resonating just below the human threshold of hearing. 3 pulses. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. The same pattern returned in hydrophone readings beneath Lake Titicaca, in seismic monitors in Potosí, and later in space telemetry from satellites orbiting low over South America. Always the same frequency, always the same rhythm. When researchers filtered the data, they found harmonics, faint but deliberate, layered like chords. Not random, not environmental, constructed. They played it through speakers, and once again, the air responded. Every test chamber, every closed room filled with the same slow pulse of resonance. Not loud, but alive. The walls vibrated as though the building itself were remembering. It wasn't sound anymore. It was memory made physical. A technician in La Paz, Raúl Ibáñez, described it best. He said it wasn't something you heard, but something that rearranged the space around you. The air thickened, the light shifted, and within that stillness, you realized something was breathing beside you. Not hostile, not kind, just present. Raúl began keeping his recorder running through the nights. On the last tape he made, there's nothing for the first 10 minutes but static. Then, faintly, the pulse returns. 3, 2, 3. After a moment, his voice, half awake, whispers, "Está aquí." It's here. Then a second voice answers, perfectly identical. "Está aquí." His breathing quickens. The second voice matches him exactly, delayless, flawless, until there's no distinction between the two. The tape ends mid-inhale. The recorder was found still spinning. The tape stretched to its end. That was in 2003. After that, reports stopped. The valley was never rediscovered, though travelers sometimes mentioned fog gathering unnaturally along the mountain passes. It always smelled of lime, candle wax, and rain. On some nights, when storms pass over the eastern Andes, radio operators hear faint distortion between channels. Not static, but harmonic tones that fade the moment they're acknowledged. Engineers have measured them, traced them, filtered them. The source is never local. The readings always triangulate back to the same hollow stretch of land once marked as San Esteban del Llano. And within those frequencies, when slowed to half speed, one phrase repeats again and again in low, shifting tones. Not sung, not spoken, something in between. We remember the silence. At dawn, when the mountains turn silver and the valleys still sleep, the wind through the ravine sometimes carries the faint echo of bells. No one sees the tower. No one finds the road. Only the sound, a breath drawn deep and slow, exhaled across the stones of a world that learned to speak through stillness. 3, 2, 3. Then the quiet after, so complete, so absolute that you can almost hear it waiting to begin again.